You have been throwing away bread your entire life. Not because you wanted to, not because you are wasteful, because the bread gave you no choice. 2 days on the counter and the texture is wrong. 3 days and the smell is off. 4 days and there is a green spot in the corner that ends the whole conversation. You toss it, you go back to the store, you buy another loaf, and the cycle repeats itself so reliably that you have stopped questioning it. You have accepted stale bread and moldy bread and disappointing bread as a fundamental law of nature, like gravity, like taxes, like traffic on a Friday afternoon. It just is what it is, except it is not what it is. It is what they made it. About 40 minutes outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there are Amish families baking bread right now. Bread with no preservatives, no calcium propionate, no potassium sorbate, no sodium benzoate, no ingredients that require a chemistry degree to decode, just flour, water, salt, and a technique these families have been using for 300 years. And that bread, sitting on a wooden counter in a kitchen with no electricity and no climate control, will still be soft and fresh 2 weeks from today. The crumb moist, the texture tender, the experience identical to fresh bread on day 14. The commercial bread industry knows exactly why this happens. They have studied it in their laboratories. They have measured the moisture retention and the starch behavior and the mold resistance, and they understand every mechanism behind it completely, and they will never use it, because bread that lasts 2 weeks is bread you buy twice a month. Bread that goes stale in 2 days is bread you buy 15 times a month. The profit margin on your frustration is enormous, and they have been collecting it for decades while selling you chemicals they told you were necessary. They were never necessary. The Amish never participated in that system. They baked bread before supermarkets existed, in communities where going to a store was not a daily option. They needed bread that lasted because their lives demanded it. Through generations of kitchen knowledge passed from grandmothers to daughters to granddaughters, they developed a method that solved the freshness problem permanently and naturally. No chemicals, no laboratories, no food science department. Just accumulated wisdom from people who paid close attention to what worked and never stopped doing it. Let us start with what actually happens when bread goes stale, because most people have the wrong picture entirely. The common assumption is that bread dries out, and that is the whole story. Keep the moisture in, and the bread stays fresh. That is partially true, but it misses the deeper mechanism. Bread can go stale even in humid conditions. Bread can go stale even when it still contains plenty of water. The staleness you experience is not just moisture loss. It is a structural transformation happening at the molecular level inside your loaf, and it is called retrogradation. Starch is the primary component of bread flour. Starch consists of long chains of glucose molecules. When flour meets water and heat in the oven, those starch chains absorb water and swell. They loosen, spread, and become flexible. This is why fresh bread feels the way it does. The starch is in a gelatinized state, swollen with water, pliable, yielding. Every bite of soft, fresh bread is you experiencing gelatinized starch. Then time passes. The starch molecules begin doing something they are naturally inclined to do. They start realigning. Those loosened chains find each other again, form new bonds, and crystallize back into rigid structures. The water bound up inside those soft starch networks gets pushed out. The crumb firms. The bread loses its yielding quality. What you experience as staleness is your teeth encountering starch that has reorganized itself into something closer to its original hard state. This process is retrogradation, and it is the primary reason bread fails regardless of moisture conditions. Commercial bread slows this process with chemicals. Mono and diglycerides interfere with starch crystallization. Enzymes break down certain starch structures to delay reorganization. Calcium propionate prevents mold from colonizing the bread, while the staleness is being chemically managed. The result is a loaf that stays soft longer than it naturally would, but not as long as it could, and not without consequences the industry would prefer you not examine too carefully. A 2002 study at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney examined children who consumed bread containing calcium propionate compared to children who consumed bread without it. The children eating preserved bread showed measurable behavioral changes: increased irritability, difficulty concentrating, symptoms resembling attention deficit disorder. When the preservative was removed from their diet, the symptoms resolved within days. The only variable that changed was the presence of that compound in their bread. The study did not prove causation definitively, but it proved that a chemical added purely for commercial convenience had neurological effects on children whose parents never consented to that experiment. Potassium bromate tells an even more unsettling story. Once common in American bread for strengthening dough and improving rise, it was eventually classified as a possible human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Europe banned it, Canada banned it, China banned it, Brazil banned it. The United States still permits it. The FDA has asked bakers to voluntarily stop using it. Voluntary requests carry no legal weight, and many have not complied. None of these compounds are necessary. The Amish have been proving that for 300 years. The science behind their method was formally documented when a food scientist named Dr. Emily Beller obtained a 3-day-old loaf of Amish bread from a Lancaster County market. Her training told her it should be hard and dry and unpleasant. 3-day-old bread without preservatives had no business being soft. But it was soft. She pressed it with her fingers, and it yielded. She measured the moisture content with laboratory equipment and found it significantly higher than any commercial bread of equivalent age in her study. She then measured starch crystallization using X-ray diffraction, the gold standard assessment for retrogradation, and found the Amish bread showing crystallization rates 1/5 to 1/7 that of conventional bread. Not slightly slower, not marginally better. A fraction of the rate. The bread was scientifically different from anything the commercial industry was producing, and it contained nothing that could not be found in any kitchen on Earth. What Dr. Beller traced the difference back to was a step that appeared nowhere in commercial bread production, a step that predated modern food science by centuries. The Amish were pre-gelatinizing a portion of their flour before the dough was ever assembled, creating a thick, cooked paste that fundamentally altered the moisture behavior of the finished loaf. This technique had a name in Asian baking traditions, where it had been discovered independently: Tangzhong in Chinese practice, and Yudan in Japanese. Two cultures on opposite sides of the world, with no contact with Amish communities in Switzerland and Germany, arriving at the identical discovery because the physics of starch behaves the same everywhere on Earth. The pre-gelatinized starch holds 5 to 10 times more water than raw starch does. That transforms the finished bread in a way no chemical additive can replicate authentically. The loaf ends up containing 10 to 15% more water than a conventionally made bread, but that water is not loose or soggy. It is locked inside the expanded molecular structure of the gelatinized starch, held there and released slowly over days and weeks rather than evaporating within hours of the bread leaving the oven. The second effect is the one that directly defeats retrogradation. Starch chains that are already swollen and entangled with water molecules cannot efficiently find each other and realign into crystals. The reorganization that causes staleness still happens eventually, but it happens at a fraction of the normal rate. What takes 2 days in a regular loaf takes 2 weeks in bread built around this technique. Dr. Beller measured this directly and published her findings in 2010. The bread industry read those findings and changed nothing, because nothing about their business model rewarded them for doing so. What makes the Amish approach even more remarkable is that this pre-gelatinization technique is only half of what they do. There is a second element working alongside it, one that addresses mold resistance through an entirely different mechanism, one that is not a chemical and not a laboratory invention, but something alive that some Amish families have kept continuously alive for over 100 years. That is where part 2 picks up. The second half of what makes Amish bread so resistant to mold and staleness is not a technique you can learn in 5 minutes. It is not a step you can add to a recipe on a Tuesday afternoon. It is something that has to be kept alive, fed regularly, and maintained across years and sometimes decades before it reaches its full potential. Some Amish families are working with a version of it that has been alive and continuously tended since before their grandparents were born. That kind of time cannot be purchased from a specialty store or replicated from a packet. It can only be inherited or built slowly from scratch. It is sourdough starter, but not the way most people understand sourdough. When the word sourdough entered mainstream conversation a few years ago, it arrived wrapped in a particular aesthetic: artisan bakeries, expensive loaves with dramatic scoring patterns, home bakers posting photographs of their crumb structure on social media, a pandemic hobby that peaked and faded. Most people who encountered sourdough during that period experienced it as a trend, something fashionable and slightly complicated that required more attention than it was worth. That perception is exactly what the commercial bread industry is comfortable with. Because sourdough that is understood only as a trend is sourdough that gets abandoned, and abandoned sourdough means customers return to the bread aisle. The Amish relationship with sourdough has nothing to do with trends. It predates the concept of food trends by several centuries. For Amish bakers, the starter sitting in a ceramic crock in the corner of the kitchen is not a hobby. It is infrastructure. It is as fundamental to the household as the woodpile or the root cellar. It gets fed because the family depends on it, and it has been fed continuously in some households for longer than living memory can trace. Understanding why that matters requires understanding what sourdough starter actually is at a biological level, because most people have only a vague picture of it. Commercial yeast, the kind sold in packets and used in virtually every commercially produced bread, is a single organism. One species, one strain, selected and cultivated specifically because it makes dough rise fast. Speed was the selection criterion because speed serves industrial production schedules. A dough that rises in an hour can be processed, shaped, baked, packaged, and shipped within a commercial time frame. The bread that results from this fast fermentation rises reliably and consistently, but it carries none of the biological complexity that slow fermentation creates. It goes into the oven as essentially defenseless dough and comes out as bread that has nothing protecting it from mold or staleness, except whatever chemicals were added to the recipe. Sourdough starter is not a single organism, it is an entire ecosystem. Wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria living together in a relationship built over time, producing compounds during fermentation that no single organism could produce alone, and that no chemical additive can authentically replicate. The diversity inside a mature sourdough starter, particularly one that has been maintained for generations in the same environment, is genuinely remarkable. Dozens of microbial species interacting, competing, and cooperating in ways that science is still working to fully map. The most important compounds this ecosystem produces during fermentation are organic acids, primarily lactic acid and acetic acid. These acids accumulate throughout the long, slow fermentation process, which in Amish bread making typically happens overnight rather than in a rushed single hour. As the acids build up, the pH of the dough drops steadily into a range where mold spores and harmful bacteria simply cannot establish themselves. The bread becomes biologically hostile to the organisms that would spoil it, not because a chemical was added to create that hostility, but because the fermentation process built it in from the inside. The practical result is dramatic. A sourdough loaf under normal storage conditions resists mold for 10 to 14 days. The equivalent loaf made with commercial yeast and no preservatives might show mold in 4 or 5 days. Same flour, same water, same kitchen environment, completely different outcome because of the biology living inside the dough during fermentation. The organic acids produced by lactic acid bacteria do what calcium propionate pretends to do, except naturally, without behavioral side effects in children, without carcinogen classifications in other countries, without any of the consequences that come with chemical intervention. The acids do something else too that works directly alongside the pre-gelatinized starch technique from part 1. Lactic acid partially breaks down starch molecules during the long fermentation, creating smaller starch fragments that gelatinize more thoroughly during baking and resist retrogradation more effectively afterward. The fermentation itself contributes to freshness, not just mold resistance. The two techniques are not simply additive, they interact and amplify each other, creating a finished loaf whose freshness and mold resistance is greater than either method could produce independently. This is why Amish bread made with both techniques, the cooked flour paste and the long sourdough fermentation, outperforms anything the commercial bread industry produces despite their laboratories and their research budgets and their armies of food scientists. The Amish are not working with superior technology. They are working with superior biology, developed and refined across 300 years of daily practice in kitchens where the only measure of success was whether the bread was still good on the day the family needed it. The commercial industry understood all of this and made a calculated choice. Organic acids from slow fermentation cannot be produced at industrial speed. A 12 to 24-hour fermentation schedule cannot be compressed into the 1-hour rise time that commercial production requires. The sourdough ecosystem cannot be standardized and controlled the way a single yeast strain can. Every variable that makes sourdough bread extraordinary is a variable that makes it incompatible with industrial scale production. So, the industry replaced the biology with chemistry, replaced the slow fermentation with fast yeast, replaced the organic acids with calcium propionate, and told consumers the result was bread. It was not bread in the sense that Amish families understand bread. It was a product engineered for shelf logistics and repeat purchase, sold in packaging that used words like fresh and wholesome to describe something that required a banned carcinogen in its production. The Amish never made that trade. Their bread takes longer to make because good biology cannot be rushed. Their starters are older than most modern institutions because continuity is what gives a starter its depth and complexity. Their bread lasts 2 weeks on a wooden counter in a kitchen with no refrigeration because 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge built something that industrial food science, for all its resources, has never genuinely matched. What the Amish preserved was not just a technique, it was a standard that said bread should nourish, should last, should contain nothing that harms the people eating it, and should taste like something worth eating. That standard never required a laboratory to defend it. It only required people who refused to abandon it when convenience came along and offered them something cheaper and faster and fundamentally worse. You now understand why their bread does not go moldy. It is not mystery. It is not magic. It is 300 years of getting the biology right while an entire industry was busy finding profitable shortcuts around it. The knowledge was always there, in those kitchens, in those ceramic crocks, in the hands of grandmothers who never stopped doing what worked. It was never lost. We just stopped asking.